So let's get started. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the AGT Sol Professional Development Series. I am Madhu Kesi, AGT Sol President, and your host for today. It's great to have you all join us from different parts of the country, different part of the state, and around the world. This webinar aims to offer various workshops and talks as part of professional development opportunities for AGT Sol members and is also open to the public. The title of today's webinar is Empowering Multilingual Writers, Strategies for First Year College Competition Success. So let me briefly introduce our guest speaker for today's webinar, Dr. Sarah Amani. Dr. Amani is a professor of multilingual composition and specialist at Arizona Western College and the AGT Southwest Arizona Regional Representative. She holds a PhD in Applied Linguistics from the University of Auckland, New Zealand, and MA in Teaching English as a Foreign Language, and a BA in English Language and Literature from Ferdowsi, right? University in Iran, along with a certificate in English language teaching to adults from New Zealand. With teaching experience spanning Iran, New Zealand, Australia, and the USA, Dr. Amani brings a wealth of intercultural knowledge and diverse perspectives to her research and instructional pedagogy. She also serves as the TEDx at Arizona Western College, and she's the director and licensee for that program, where she promotes impactful ideas and stories from our community. Let me share a little bit about the format and structure of the webinar. Dr. Amani will present her session for about 40 to 45 minutes. Then we'll have a 10-15 minutes, depending on how, depending on the time line we have for Q&A session toward the end of the talk. So if you would like to ask question directly to this to the presenter, you can do that. But if you want to just put your question on the chat, you can submit your question there. So those questions will be asked to the speaker. As you know, that this webinar is going to be recorded and will be available on the AGTSOL YouTube channel later. Now, let's welcome Dr. Amani to deliver ideas on empowering multilingual writers in college composition classrooms. Over to you, Dr. Amani.
Thank you so much, Madhu, for the introduction, and hello, everybody from Yuma, Arizona. I'm really excited to be here with you today to, discuss some strategies for empowering multilingual writers. I am the coordinator of the multilingual program, professor of multilingual composition here in Arizona Western College. But before we begin, I would love to know who is here today. So please take a moment to write in the chat where you're attending this seminar from. It might be a state in the US or a different country. And if you like, you can even share the organization or the institution that you're representing. So I'm just going to give it a few seconds to see where the participants of this seminar are from today. Going to look at the chat. We have Megan from NAU, Cynthia from AWC, Melody from Peoria, Arizona, Madhu from Arizona State University, Daniel from AWC, Wendy, great to have you here, graduate student in TESOL at ASU, Jess from NAU. Was that all? We have Valeria. Good to see you, Valeria, in California. Then we have Samrina from Pakistan. Wow, Juan from Chile. Okay. Wow, this is awesome. It's just great that you see all this diverse group of educators and professionals come together, right? Maru, what's going on with these lines over my slides? Feel like you're trying to do some drawing on my slides, which is okay. But I was just wondering what these lines are being created. Um, anyway, so it's great to have you here. I guess it kind of shows how important this conversation is, right? Now, I understand that my main focus today is on multilingual writers in the US college composition context. But many of the strategies and the tools that we're going to discuss can also be applied globally, especially that I noticed that we have some people from Pakistan or from Chile. So, I'm sure you all agree that language diversity is just an asset everywhere, right? So I hope in today's session we can just discuss some valuable and some adaptable approaches to support our students. What I'm going to do, Maru, I'm going to maybe stop sharing and let's see if we can take care of those lines.
Sure.
Okay, I'm going to share again. Okay, hello from Texas. Good to have you here. All right. Okay, lines are gone. Perfect. Can you guys see my screen?
Yep.
Yeah. Okay, perfect. Okay, now that we've, introduced ourselves, where we're from, let's just take a quick look at what we're going to be covering today. We will explore some of the unique challenges that our multilingual writers face in academic settings. From there, we will discuss some culturally responsive teaching practices and, some maybe actionable strategies for incorporating this linguistic diversity into composition, writing instruction, and some inclusive assessment approaches. And finally, we will discuss some ways to reflect on our teaching and maybe refine our teaching to create more supportive and more empowering learning environments for a multilingual student. And throughout this 45 minutes session, I encourage you to think about how these ideas apply to your teaching context. And feel free to take notes if you want to have some questions. We will have some time for Q&A, like Madhu said, and I would appreciate if Madhu made sure that I would not miss them in case you, put them in the chat as I'm going through the slides. Having said that, let's get started. All right. So first, let's begin with who our multilingual students actually are. And here in the US, we don't think of them as this single uniform group, right? In fact, they are incredibly diverse. We have US born bilingual students who grew up speaking a language other than English at home, but they may have attended school entirely in English. Then there are what we call Generation 1.5 students. These are students who immigrated young, so they've actually experienced schooling in more than one country, and they are kind of navigating all these different languages and cultures. We also have students who are more recent arrivals who came to the U.S. as teenagers, and of course, we have international students, right, who have grown up in other countries and then they have crossed borders and they just bring with them a lot of different background, educational, cultural backgrounds and influences. So as you can see, when we say multilingual students, we're not really focusing on whether they're bilingual or whether they're trilingual or can speak more than one. We're talking about a huge range of backgrounds and experiences. So now let's look at some of the challenges that multilingual students face. One big challenge can be acculturation, right? It's not just about adjusting to life in the U.S. It's also about adapting to life on, let's say, on a college campus, which obviously has its own culture, it has its own expectations, which can sometimes feel totally foreign to some students. Then we have linguicism, right? That's bias based on language, and unfortunately, some students may encounter this. Of course, in different forms, it can be, hopefully not always explicit comments about their language skills, right? Or it might be sometimes some more kind of subtle message that they may get that, hey, your accent is not as comprehensible, right? And of course, you agree that this can make students feel like they're they're being judged, or that they don't belong, or that they should really try to fit in, right? Which can um, impacts them hugely. It can impact their confidence and their performance, right? Um, Class participation is another area where they might struggle. Some students they kind of hold back from speaking up, um, especially those of us who work with a large number of international students or multilingual students like myself, where a large number of my students they commute, like they cross the border, Mexico US border on a daily basis. They just have this different mindset, right? They might be worried about, hey, what if I get it wrong, right? Or what if my accent will make me misunderstood? What if I make a grammatical mistake? So there are all these different reasons or perceptions that they may have, where they may struggle participating in the class. Imposter syndrome is also common, right? Some multilingual learners, including myself, feel like, hey, what if I don't fully belong in the in this college or university or in this academic setting, right? Especially if they have got some messages or comments from former instructors, especially if they have been made to feel that maybe their English proficiency or their accent, it is a barrier. And of course, we can't ignore the time factor, right? Reading through all these course materials and then writing assignments, we all know it takes longer for multilingual students. They may need just extra time to process all the materials, to write and to rewrite and to revise in English. So these are just some of the challenges that I'm sure you have experienced in your classes, working with this diverse student population. But now that we have examined some of these challenges, I want us to kind of take a step back and to reflect on our own perspectives as instructors or as educators. And I believe that one of the most important aspects of supporting multilingual writers is cultural humility. I'm sure you've heard of cultural competence, right? Who hasn't? But cultural humility is a concept that actually started in healthcare. And surprisingly, it hasn't really been explored much in education and in second language acquisition, especially. It's been defined as a personal, lifelong commitment to self evaluation and self critique, whereby the individual not only learns about another's culture, but one starts with an examination of his or her own beliefs and cultural identities. So here, it's this lifelong practice of self reflection on your biases, personal biases, right? We all may have some biases, some linguistic biases, cultural biases, and then you stay open, right, to learning from others. And I want you to just pause for a minute, and I want you to think. Um, and feel free if you want to unmute yourself, and if you want to share in the chat. What are some assumptions that you have noticed in academic settings about multilingual students? Here, for instance, I have three assumptions. I'm going to start. Feel free if you want to chat in the, if you want to put it in the chat, or like I said, after I go through this, if you want to unmute yourself and share yours. But some of the assumptions that I myself have encountered is that multilingual students, they must conform to, standard English in their writing, right? But come on, we know that this is a very rigid view of academic success, right? We know that this is kind of exclusionary. We know that it's rooted in colonial ideals, in Eurocentric ideas, or that students should try to sound like native speakers, right? As if success in communication is just about perfection, right? It's not. It's about clarity and meaning. And if you want our students to sound like native speakers, we're actually putting a lot of pressure on them. And we also ignore the world English is, right? Or the fact that English exists in many varieties. And who says that one variety is more valid or better than others, right? Why they're all equally valid. Another misconception can be, hey, students with strong accents are hard to understand, right? So they have to really improve their speech. Again, if you remain culturally humble, right? That's where cultural humility comes from. If you are culturally humble, um, you shift your mindset. You'll think that, hey, if I am having if there is a difficulty understanding an accent, maybe it's me, maybe it's the listener's unfamiliarity with the accent, not the speaker's lack of skill, right? So instead of shifting the burden to the student with a difficult accent, you as the listener should maybe rethink of this assumption, right? Of this bias, and maybe should practice some active listening. I see that some of you have put some comments here. Maru, that I cannot be as good as native speakers of English in writing. That's right. Okay. Any others if you want to unmute yourself?
Okay, there we go. Well, hello everyone. Hola. One assumption that I've seen is I call it I know that's not the technical term, but I call it the hierarchy of accents. Where like if a certain accent would denote certain levels of intelligence. So like someone like, a person from Britain might their accent may denote like, hi, they're this sophisticated and intelligent, so forth. Yet someone from, let's say, from Mexico and such, their accent denotes, oh, they're less intelligent. That's something I've seen in academics and educational terms.
Exactly. Yeah. Thank you so much for sharing. So next, I would like to show this Venn diagram, which shows the distinctions and overlaps between cultural competence that we've all heard of and cultural humility. I want you to have a quick look at it. You see that cultural competence focuses on knowing the background of cultures, their values and customs, right? It emphasizes learning facts about other cultures, and it just carries this attitude that you can master, you can know everything about a culture, right? And that's the goal, right? That you want to be culturally competent. Um, but but cultural humility emphasizes this self-reflection, this critical self-reflection, and a willingness to challenge personal, cultural linguistic biases. It focuses on an ongoing learning, recognizing that we don't have all the answers, and it's perfectly okay. But as long as we remain curious, right, and open and willing to learn about other cultures, it involves being vulnerable and humble, culturally humble, understanding that relationships are about equality and reducing this negative power dynamics. And like I said, it's a lifelong practice. It's not a one-time achievement. So cultural competence is a goal, right? That you want to master or know everything about a culture. But cultural humility is a mindset, and just staying humble about recognizing that you may not have all the answers. Now, as you can see, where they overlap, both cultural competence and cultural humility, they aim to work collaboratively, which is great, and address inequalities. They involve bringing our own stories into conversations, and engaging with cultural differences. Now, you may wonder why knowing this distinction matters, right? For those of us educators working with multilingual writers. And I really believe understanding the differences between these concepts can help us think about how we can and how we should interact with our students. And the question that comes to mind is, hey, are we approaching their experiences as something to master, competence, or are we staying open and reflective and willing to learn from them, our students, as equal partners? Humility, right? And I think cultural humility is especially important because it just creates that space for our students to share their strengths with their even challenges, right? Without feeling like they need to fit in, without feeling like they need to conform to our expectations, because that's the exact opposite of belonging. The opposite of belonging is not that you should fit in or you should conform, right? But that you are proud of, that you proudly share your unique linguistic and cultural identities and strengths. So, to summarize, the key difference is this: cultural competence is primarily external. It's about learning facts. It's about understanding other cultures, knowing their values, their practices, their norms, right? But cultural humility is primarily internal. It's about reflecting on your own biases. It's about being open to ongoing learning and approaching interactions with, with openness, with some humility, right? So, and I'm going to give an example. Imagine a multilingual student submits an essay, and they're required to incorporate some idioms from their home language or some rhetorical styles from their native language, right? An educator who is culturally competent, right, would recognize those elements, right? Perfect. But would also suggest that they would maybe translate them into academic English or sometimes standard academic English, right? But an educator who's culturally humble, they would go a step further. They actually ask the student about the meaning behind these idioms or rhetorical styles. They would reflect on their own assumptions about what academic writing should really look like. And maybe they would try to find ways or assignments or projects to incorporate the student's voice into the assignment. So, like I said, what you do here is to shift from external knowledge to internal reflection, right? Um, so that's why many of the slides that we're going to have after this major distinction of cultural competence and cultural humility, uh, I want you to actually look at it from the lens of cultural humility, okay? Now that we know the importance of this, let's just talk about how we can maybe take some actionable steps to create a class or that really centers student experiences. Now, in many educational models, traditional educational models, right? As we know, the focus is on teacher and teacher-centered instruction, and sometimes Western values like individualism and how some academic boundaries that we have. Some of this obviously have to be cherished, right? But some of these approaches, unfortunately, they just do not recognize or incorporate the cultural experiences or the personal experiences that multilingual students bring into the classroom. But my question is, what happens when we try to intentionally, right, decenter this traditional narrative? What happens if we shift the focus from them conforming to our expectations to them valuing and being proud of taking pride in their like linguistic repertoire? Now on this slide I have included some specific strategies to to making that shift, including storytelling projects or incorporating personal anecdotes into writing, engaging students in conversations about their cultural and individual values. I personally have used these strategies in my own first year composition classes, and I have seen how they can transform the classroom, right, into a very empowering space for my students. Okay, now that we've talked about the importance of, centering student experience, let's just shift to another area, which is understanding the academic writing norms in the US. Because for our multilingual students, these norms can feel completely unfamiliar at first, right? Because these expectations for academic writing can just be very different across cultures. We do have some educators and professionals here, including myself, who were not even born in the States, right? I'm originally Persian from Iran. And I remember that first time I went to New Zealand to do my PhD, I was quite unfamiliar, even if I had done my master's, right? Because expectations for academic writing was quite different. So my both of my advisors had quite a lot of work to do with me. So for our multilingual students, what's expected in an assignment here in our colleges in the US, right, may just look very different from what they're used to. For example, the word count can be surprising. Some cultures, like Asian cultures, for instance, right? They care, they value just like giving concise answers. Here, we want our students to write at length, right? We want them to explore an idea really deeply, right? The organization of writing can be different. In some cultures, uh, they are advised to give a very indirect approach, then building up to the main idea, right? But in American academic writing, we want a clear thesis right up front, right? Then we want some direct support, then analysis following. Then there is a question of how to support ideas. We place a very, very big emphasis on analysis and on personal argumentation, right? But it just may not be common in other cultures, right? And again, I'm not saying that one is better than the other, or that they're here so they have to conform to our expectations. Yes, maybe in some aspects they should. All I'm saying is that it's going to take some time for us. And again, we got to show this, we got to stay culturally humble of the experiences that they are bringing. I guess I missed two. Then we have citations and documentations, right? They're another area. It can be a big learning curve. Again, because different cultures may have different norms around citing sources. Even classroom behavior and participation expectations can be new. In some places, students are expected to listen more than speak. I get a lot of Mexican or Mexican American students, and they have this concept of respect for their maestra, right? And so they don't consider active participation or expressing their opinions as sometimes polite. But we encourage that, right? Adjusting to all these norms, all I'm saying is that it's going to take time, and it's completely normal for multilingual students to need a little longer just to feel comfortable with these expectations. Um, so we talked about navigating all this academic expectation and academic discourse, right? That can be overwhelming. It can be even alienating for some of the students. But one of the best ways that we can support them is by shifting the focus from the final product to the process of learning and growing as writers, right? When we emphasize the writing process, we give the students the tools to develop their writing skills step by step. Okay. And this is very important for multilingual writers, for all writers, but particularly multilingual, because they benefit from multi-drafting and scaffolding assignments and just reflecting on their progress. Let's just take a quick look at some of these approaches. Let's start with multi-drafting. That's what I do, and I know many of you may do in your classes, in your composition classes. Instead of expecting my students to produce a polished writing in just one go, giving them their prompt, setting a deadline, in one go, expecting them to submit a polished writing, I create opportunities for multiple drafts. Okay. And each draft for them is really a chance to refine their ideas or their language use, or their structure and organization. And it allows me to give them feedback, and peers to give each other feedback, right? And of course, if you have some writing centers for tutors to give them feedback, and it allows really the students to reflect on the feedback. They can rewrite, they can experiment with all these revisions, and hopefully, they can grow as writers. Scaffolding is also key to helping students build confidence. Now, think of it as break it down into smaller and more manageable steps, right? One complex assignment is going to be broken down into some more chewable, let's say, pieces, right? So here is an example, right? You can break down. You can start with reflective writing. Okay, students explore their own experiences. It may even be in an informal way, or it may even be in a free writing manner. Then they move on to summary writing. Then you guide them toward an argumentative essay, right? That's where maybe they combine critical thinking and evidence and their unique voice, etc. So that would be, scaffolding. Then we have peer review. I use peer review in all my assignments. It's a very powerful strategy. And when students review each other's work, I'm not saying, okay, just give them the papers and leave the room, come to your office, right? No, we want to guide these peer review sessions so they can focus on certain areas, right? Maybe the strength of thesis statement, maybe the clarity, right? But the goal here is not just to critique grammar or mechanics, because most of the time that's what they will focus on, right? We want them to highlight each other's strengths. We also want to guide them through giving feedback that can help them improve content and idea development and organization. Finally, I think it's very important that we shift the emphasis from grammatical perfection to overall growth. I'm more than happy to share some of the rubrics that I have created for my assignments. You don't see anything as grammar or grammatical accuracy in any of my rubrics. Okay, I mean, our students, multilingual students, they are hyper aware of their grammar, right? And if we put that emphasis on the grammar, it really overshadows their progress and their interest, in some other important aspects like idea development or their voice, right? So to counter this, I use, for example, these reflective practices, right? The reflective journals, for instance. And that's where students they can, track their progress, for instance, over the semester and what they've learned, what they have found challenging, and how they can, overcome these challenges, etc. Now, let's move on to creating a culturally inclusive classroom. Um, Multilingual students, we all know, they're amazing. They bring very unique experiences to our classes, right? So it's really our responsibility as educators just to make sure that these perspectives that they bring to our classrooms are acknowledged, that we show that we care, that we celebrate them, right? And if we build a culturally inclusive pedagogy or curriculum, right, we show that their identities, their experiences matter to us. So, one way to create an inclusive space is by designing assignments. And in a bit, I'm going to show you some of the assignments that I have or created over years that specifically include these aspects of their cultural background. Instead of assigning like a generic essay, right? We can ask about, hey, write about a tradition or custom in your community. That way they can share their experience, they can take pride in their heritage, right? Or we can say, hey, share a word or phrase in your native language. My mother tongue is Persian, right? Share a word or phrase that has a special meaning for you. Okay. So again, we acknowledge their multilingualism. We invite them, and of course their peers, right, to learn from one another, to remain culturally humble, to show that you're willing and you're open to learn from one another. Okay. Another part of inclusivity is validating students' identity. So, like I said, sometimes students just feel pressured to conform to, a single standard of English, right? They may get a feeling that, oh, maybe my language is less valuable. Okay. So we can help them we can help them by kind of sharing our opinion that multilingualism is a strength. We can encourage them to, even in their assignments or in discussions, to, like, rely on their first language sometimes, but maybe share stories, maybe share idioms, maybe share proverbs from your own culture. Okay. Next, instead of seeing multilingualism and even different levels of language proficiency, right, as maybe a barrier, we can frame it as a resource. We can encourage code meshing. Again, I got some assignments where students may write a poem and they may code switch, or they may do some translanguaging between their mother tongue and English, right? They can mix their home language and English to express an idea. It's also important, like I said earlier, to maybe revisit how we assess writing, because standard rubrics just don't account for linguistic diversity. And it even worse, it kind of penalize students for using non-standard English. So we can create rubrics that value maybe ideas, even their efforts, just as much as or even more than grammatical accuracy. And again, I believe this really helps shift the focus to what students can do, rather than constantly focusing on what they cannot do or what they struggle with, right? Because, like I said, multilingual students are already hyper aware of their grammar. Now I would like to share a concrete example of what building a culturally inclusive classroom can look like on a larger scale. In 2020, so almost like 4.5 years ago, as the coordinator of the multilingual composition program at Arizona Western College, I helped develop a multilingual composition program for our multilingual students. So here we offer English 107, English 108, which are the multilingual equivalents of mainstream first year composition courses of English 101 and 102. And these classes are, like they are designed to meet students where they are. Okay. So we acknowledge that they bring with them some challenges, but also some unique strengths. So instead of requiring the students to kind of fit into this standard English, or, kind of one size fits all standard English, the main focus, the professors who teach the courses, main focus is to prioritize a sense of belonging and a sense of inclusion, right, by creating the assignments. So yes, a key feature of the program is the assignments we create. In a minute, I'm going to share with you some of those assignments. But another highlight of the program is our multilingual student expo series that my students and I have created. And we hold them every semester. And that's where we have a theme. Students showcase their writing, art, music, like graphic designs, digital designs, any projects related to that particular theme that we have chosen for the expo. Here, I'm going to share with you some of the photos. It all started in October 2021 with the very first Multilingual Student Expo. We focused on promoting multilingualism and embracing multiculturalism at our school. This was supposed to be a one-time event. It was a class project, honestly, but we just received a lot of positive response from our community, and that positive response just encouraged me and my students to turn this one-time event into a tradition. And this is a tradition that we have proudly continued, semester after semester since that October 2021. We celebrated multilingual students' work by making it visible in our second expo in March 2022. Then the following semester, fall semester, we gathered under the powerful theme of cherishing unity in diversity. Our fourth expo shared multilingual voices, stories of identity, and that's where students, share their personal stories about identities. In March 2024, we celebrated the theme Rising Beyond Multilingual Triumphs. So they showcase all these different projects and they highlighted their strength and their resilience of them as multilingual students. And this last October, we focus on the multilingual magic of dreams and how our dreams and how our dreamscapes, right, are shaped by our languages and our cultures and our identities. We are planning to have our seventh expo in March of this year. We're still working on a theme, but here I have included all these different writing projects. Like I said, they showcase multiple projects, right? Art and music and graphics and multimodal projects. But for instance, in our first expo, they first wrote an essay on the four stages of acculturation. Based on that, they created some posters, right, tied to Hispanic Heritage Month because 74% of our students in Arizona Western College are Hispanic. So again, based on all these different components of cultural humility, right? So just it they obviously incorporated multimodal expression through posters, right? But they also reflected on their cultural identity. Okay, Madhu says for March 2024, ACTs will continue support to program. Thank you. Yes, our students actually got, I think, $200 in our last two expos. So we got them some, Starbucks cards for those students who participated. So Madhu, it's great to hear that we have that support for our seventh expo. In the second expo, they wrote an essay on the benefits of multilingualism, right? Um, all this as main projects, they were all research based. They had to look at it from personal, professional, and educational. But then they wrote I Am From poems, right? And they even created videos. So this was, again, a multimodal project. It really encouraged them to see their multilingualism as a strength. And, like I said, they expressed it through poetry and videos. In the third one, they wrote an essay on the significance of unity and diversity. Those are some of the topics that I kind of stole from my students' essay, and I put them here in this PowerPoint. Then they wrote poems. De aquí de allá. Professor Daniel Herrera is here. He was one of the professors who also participated, and he read his piece from here and from there poem. Then in the fourth expo, they wrote an essay on types of identity, personal identity, social identity, cultural identities. And then what came after that, expository essay was just beautiful. They wrote identity memoirs and they explored identity by just, getting into the storytelling skill. And again, this is about decentering, right? This traditional narrative that we talked about. In the fifth expo, they wrote an essay on imposter syndrome. What is the definition of imposter syndrome? What are some psychological impacts? What are some coping strategies? Then they wrote a manifesto on some of the challenges that they have encountered as a multilingual and how they overcame. And so they shared some of their resilience stories and triumphs, and it really encouraged some kind of self-awareness and reflection. We did a lot of scaffolding, obviously, as a process. In the sixth expo, they wrote an essay on the language dream relationship in multilinguals, and they looked at it from cognitive, emotional, cultural influences. I have received some responses from the community saying that this last one was probably their most favorite, mainly because of the follow-up activity. For 2.5 weeks, my students had to keep a log. Every morning, whenever they woke up, they would have to, in this table that I created for them, they had to jot down um, whether they remember the dreams or not, and if they do, was it in black and white? Was it in English or Spanish or other languages? Um, and then they had to write down like the key, features of that dream, and then they had to pick one of the dreams, right? And then again, they had to combine storytelling and multilingual identity and just get into some creative, storytelling and expression, and it was just amazing. So I just went through this for two reasons. One, I'm more than happy to share my prompts and my rubrics if you're interested. But if you are thinking of, just some ways to bring multilingualism and cultural diversity to the forefront, maybe consider something similar at your institution, right? Because um, again, based on personal experience and how these expos have unfolded, it's just it's a fantastic way to amplify student voices, right? You show them that you care about their identities, and of course you create an inclusive academic environment. Now, it doesn't have to be elaborate, right? You could start as a simple project, as a very small class event maybe, and again, like I said, that's how it all started from my class, and then it became a tradition to this day. But the key is to make a space for them to share their stories and their experiences and their perspectives, and you will be surprised at just the connections that it creates, right? And the sense of community that it builds. Okay, to wrap things up, because I want to make sure that we have some time for Q&A, let's just take a quick look at a few, final thoughts here. First, we want to focus on the strength, right, that multilingual students bring, their diverse perspectives, their, unique insights, and we covered some of the challenges, right? But it's very important to remember that working with these students is not all about challenges. They offer a lot of experiences that can really enhance your classroom vibe, right? Your discussions and even your assignments, if you're really open to that idea. Next, clear communication is everything, right? A few adjustments in how we want to explain concepts. Again, those norms and expectations that we take for granted, right? That they would all know. It's very important that we make some adjustments, that we set up assignments, that we handle, all this maybe assessment rubrics, right? You won't believe like how it can make a huge difference. Okay, and then I shared with you the concept of expo, right? Just think of it as a community building opportunity, because when we create a space, just like we have, when students feel comfortable, right? That hey, this is something that they're comfortable, that they feel like they belong, right? They share their experience. They can ask questions. It just becomes such an empowering learning environment. And then finally, we talked about reframing multilingualism as an asset. Okay, because again, like linguistic diversity and embracing this diversity doesn't just support multilingual students. It creates a beautiful learning experience for everybody. Now, as we move into the Q&A, I invite you to ask questions that you may have. And for those who may not have a question, I would love for you to reflect and share, and also put maybe in the chat, what is one strategy or one tool or one idea that you think you will implement to support multilingual students in your classes, in your schools, in your organizations. And then feel free to type your ideas in the chat. I would love to see, to hear your thoughts or ideas. And we can do some multitasking. So while some of you are maybe typing, we can also open the floor for some, Q&A as well. Okay, Maru says, I like Multilingual Expo. I might try it here at ASU. Maru, we've got a lot of materials and videos. I'm more than happy to share this with you.
Yeah, Cynthia, I had a question before, so I have put it. I have just written it here. So she says, like, when encouraging students to bring in their native language, such as idioms, how can we assist them in overcoming the fear of doing so? Oh, she sent me directly, so I can just put it on the chat here.
Yes, I see the question now.
Okay.
The question is, when encouraging students to bring in their native language, such as idioms, how can we assist them in overcoming the fear of doing so? That's a great question. Um, and it's totally understandable, right? If at the beginning they're worried or resistant or concerned because maybe they're just not used to it. I would say start with some, giving an example. Like I always start, even in the manifestos or the memoirs or the dreamscape. I always start by giving them a sample, right? Writing that I have written by talking about an idiom from my mother tongue, right? Or sharing with them an identity memoir about myself, about my background. So I would say start with providing some samples, and very clear scaffolding, right? If you just break it down into some smaller manageable parts and offer plenty of examples, it just will do magics. I like the reminder to learn from my students, also emphasizing growth and process. Exactly, Jess. Again, staying culturally humble. Okay. Thank you for sharing.
I just want to ask you, Dr. Manny, a question about what everyone else is talking about. So how much our multilingual writers, into AI and using AI in their writing, and then how much, are you worried or like, encouraging them to do that, or
Yeah, I
that's
mean,
random
Mario,
question.
we know plagiarism, right?
Yeah.
And citation practices in particular, when it comes to plagiarism, it just can be a very tricky area, right?
Mm-hmm.
And again, it's got multiple reasons, because sometimes the first thing that comes to our mind is, oh, they're just lazy. They just, input the prompt into ChatGPT or Grammarly, and they're just being lazy, right? But
Mm-hmm.
again, it's important to recognize that in some cultures, citation, for example, works differently, right? Or there is this issue of previous training. For many multilingual students, this formal education in
Mm-hmm.
citation practices, paraphrasing, summarizing, just may not have been a big part of their schooling. It wasn't a big part of my schooling, back home, right?
Mm-hmm.
And this all makes plagiarism detection, right, just a bit more noticeable. But I've also discussed this with some of my professors, with my, colleagues. You probably have seen it, right? That an essay flows in a certain style with a few articles or preposition errors here and there, right? But then suddenly another paragraph, there's this paragraph with complex vocabulary, right?
Mm-hmm.
Or perfect grammar, right? And of course, this might seem like a red flag, right, for plagiarism, but it's it's just that it's much more easier
Mm-hmm.
for our multilingual students to get detected for plagiarism. It's not that they're the only ones who commit this plagiarism, you know. So again, I would say it's just maybe because they're relying too much on the source's exact words. Maybe they just don't have the English vocabulary to paraphrase. Um, so yeah, I would say I would have this conversation. Let's just start by exploring why the
Mhm.
student is doing that, right? It
Mhm.
may be because they're unfamiliar with the rules. It may be because they feel overwhelmed with the assignment expectations that we have for them. Maybe they know that they have to hit a word count, right?
Mhm.
So there are just multiple reasons. Just think of a student who's reading a very heavy technical paper, right?
Mhm.
And they just don't have that strong English vocabulary. Of
Mhm.
course, they're going to struggle to paraphrase, and they may just end up sticking too closely to the original text or to ChatGPT and AI. So, yeah,
Yeah, I like the idea of like having a conversation, one-on-one conversation with the students, rather than just punishing them as being like academically dishonest, right?
exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. Valeria, we also need to take into account that not everybody is as attached to their culture and or heritage. I will make sure to give students the opportunity to reflect on their identity, share how others want to see them fit, and attached to their heritage when they're not. Yeah, that's understandable as well, right? Um, what if a student is resistant to embracing their multilingual identity, or just maybe feel embarrassed by it? You
Mhm.
know, this happens, and it's totally understandable, especially where in environments where multilingualism hasn't been valued. Again, I find that if you create that very safe and encouraging space, it really helps. Sharing stories like the ones from our multilingual student expos, or maybe highlighting successful multilingual role models, it just can make a big difference in shifting their perspective. I know we got 3 minutes if you have any questions or comments. Thank you, Cynthia, for being here. I'm glad that it was informative. Maru, I'm going to let you as the moderator to
Mhm.
run the rest of the 3 minutes that we have.
Yeah, if there are no questions, I think we are almost toward
How
the
about
end.
Maru, I share about the AZT conference that we're going to have in Yuma in Arizona Western College, actually, which is going to be in October. And
Yeah.
that's our theme: multilingual pathways, empowering language learners and educators. Be on the lookout for our proposal deadlines, and I hope that I get to see many of you. And I'm really honored and privileged to be the chair of AZTSOL 2025 conference in Yuma.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. So let me now do the closing here. Thank you all for joining this wonderful session. And also please join me in thanking Dr. Amani for delivering such a fantastic talk, shedding light on the actionable strategies and tools to support multilingual writers in the first year college composition classroom. Thank you once again for being a part of this AGTSOL professional development webinar series.
Thank you for sticking with me through all this, and let's keep supporting and learning from our multilingual students who bring so much to the table.
Thank you, Sarah.
Thank you. Take care. Have a good one.
Bye, all of you.
Bye.